My name is Reyes Aguilar. I'm one of the associate deans here at the Quinney College of Law, and I just want to welcome everyone to tonight's application workshop. The workshop is going to be covering the application components, timelines, and CAS report that will be a part of your application materials that you'll be submitting. Tonight's workshop is the second part of a series of workshops we're holding on the application process this fall. We had a live version, an in-person version we hosted at the College of Law last week. Our last two workshops will be on webinar, available online this Wednesday, obviously, and next Wednesday, a little more information on that. I want to introduce our Director for Admissions here at the Quinney College of Law. She'll be in the background. Her name is Isabel Moreno. She'll be working with us on the chat, posting websites and things that I may refer to in my discussion, and also answering questions there. I also want to thank our events staff member, Spencer Cope, who is helping us tonight on the back end also. Couple of things I'd like to mention in regard to how I'd like to conduct tonight's workshop. There is a Q&A option available, so I would ask that you post the questions there so everyone can see them. And then we have turned on the upvote option so that as questions do start populating in the Q&A, those that people are most interested in seeing answered can move to the top. As I mentioned, we have the chat that's active, and Ms. Moreno will be there entering questions. She may refer questions to me if they happen to pop up in the chat. So if you have them there, no worries on that. I have a number of things that I want to cover tonight. So what I want to do is begin with us having a discussion and you should feel free to post the questions as we move along. If it looks like we're not going to be able to finish on time, if I don't speed it up, I will ask you to hold your questions until the end. But at this point, let's just feel free to have a conversation in regards to this application process. So as I mentioned, tonight's workshop is part of our workshop series for fall of 2021. I want to introduce our admissions office staff. Myself, I'm the Associate Dean for Admissions and Financial Aid, so we will also be having a financial aid series that I'll mention here in a minute. And the Director for Admissions and Financial Aid is Isabel Moreno. Our contact information is up there. I've asked Ms. Moreno to provide, once she can access it, the slide deck from tonight's webinar, so you all will have that information available to you in the event you want to contact us. Those are our direct email addresses and telephone numbers, as well as the Calendly links if you were to want to set up a Zoom meeting with us anytime as we go through the cycle together. Sam Nyborg is our program manager, and she's really helpful also. And then the general admissions email address for general questions is listed at the bottom of the slide. Some events. We have class visits and tours available. Those are going to be posted to our website, the schedule, by early next week. Because of the rise in COVID reporting, one thing we've changed recently is that for class visits, we're no longer going to have in-person visits. We're arranging for, we have D10 technology in the classrooms now. So you'll be able to attend those virtually as if you're sitting in the class, but our class visits are going to be limited to the virtual option. We are still, however, conducting law school tours and meeting with individuals in person. Those meetings we're trying to keep to 1 or 2 persons at the most. You can schedule those on our website. Class visits and meetings will run through mid-November. We have tonight's workshop that's going to cover the contents of applications, timelines, and CAS reports. Next Wednesdays, same time, Mountain, is going to be on statements, resumes, and letters of recommendation. Our financial aid portion of the workshop series will begin on October the 13th. The first one will be legal education return on investment, kind of how do you finance this and make it pay off the most. And then the webinar on the 27th will cover scholarships, loans, and more, including repayment options. So please don't hesitate to register for those. Now let's jump into it. Application file components. These are the elements for our application file. There are statements. The required statement is the personal statement. Please read the directions closely. And this is a piece of advice for all applications that you'll be filling out for all the law schools you're looking at. Our personal statement is limited to 2 pages. We do give you a margin and a font size requirement for that. The personal statement is a required element of the application form. Other statements can include a diversity statement, if you would like to include that, a leadership statement, an academic addendum, if you feel that it warrants a discussion about some of the academic elements of your application. Character and fitness statement. Actually, I should have included a parenthetical that it's required also if you answer yes to any of the character and fitness questions in that section of our application form. And then I've listed statement of institutional interest there. Well, that's not a part of our application process. It is a very common statement that schools will either ask you to submit or allow you to submit. We see a version of this most commonly in letters of continuing interest for people who are on our wait list. But I just want to acknowledge that that's not an element of our application, but it is a very common statement we see throughout the law schools in the country. The next major element of an application are the letters of recommendation. We require 1 letter of recommendation, and then we will take up to 3. If you're a recent college graduate, our expectation is that you have 2 or 3 letters of recommendation, and 1 or 2 of those letters come from academic sources. The reason, or one of the reasons why we only require 1 letter of recommendation is because a good number of our applicant pool consists of people who have been in the workforce for a while, and they have not maintained contact with faculty members, and their job circumstance may limit their ability to get basically more than that 1 letter of recommendation. So we don't want to make it too onerous a requirement. We do want to hear from somebody who has observed your academic skills and has opinions about your candidacy for law school. But keep in mind, no more than 3 letters, and we require 1. There is a resume that is a required element of the application for our law school, and I think it's a very common element also for most schools out there. The resume is typically 1 to 2 pages long. It'll usually go back, if you've been working for a good while, 5 to 10 years. If you're a recent college graduate, go just through your college year period and then to where you are now. It'll include an education section and employment section. We encourage you to include honors and awards on that. And I personally like a personal interest section. We'll talk a little bit more about that in next week's session when we talk about resumes. The Credential Assembly Service Report is the other portion of your application. So the Credential Assembly Service is a subscription service you sign up for. Most people sign up for it usually at the same time that they register for the LSAT. It is a service provided by the Law School Admission Council, and that's the report that gives us your LSAT score or scores. You've taken it multiple times. It'll compile your undergraduate and graduate transcripts. For your undergraduate transcripts, it'll recalculate your cumulative GPA for all classes taken at all institutions attended since you graduated from high school, and then also language tests. It'll include the writing sample that is a part of your LSAT testing experience. And then there's also letters of recommendation that are included in that's how they are forwarded to us through the Credential Assembly Service Report technically. Then finally, the application form itself. We ask, it's when you print out the form, it's about a 3-page application form. There are the common questions that are going to be asked of you at many institutions, name, address, things like that. But then there's some institution-specific questions. We do ask some diversity questions, and then we ask questions about leadership, military service, things like that. Pay close attention to the character and fitness questions, not only for our application form, but for all the applications you're filling out for all the law schools you're seeking to be admitted to. We all ask questions slightly differently. And one of the reasons for that is we usually try to capture the kinds of questions that are going to be asked of you for our particular jurisdictions when people are going to be applying for the bar. We know not everyone will be sitting for the bar exam in the jurisdictions where we're located, but it is often the case that our geographic location is the most common place. The state is where the most common place candidates will seek to sit for the first bar exam. So pay close attention to what the questions are asking, and if you answer yes to the questions on our form, you will have to provide a statement for every question you answer yes to. And then finally, there is the application fee as an element of your application. We will be sending to everyone who is registered for the event tonight a application fee waiver code, so keep an eye out for that in your email. The way you apply that code is just like when you purchase something on Amazon. Once you've completed all your application forms for the application process going through the web portal administered by the Law School Admission Council, the payment page will come up for our law school. There'll be a box that says fee waiver. When you check that box, a drop down will open up, and then you put in the code number we give you. It's kind of like a coupon code. I'm going to give it a second here just to see if there's any questions that pop up. Actually, I see some in the chat. There's a question from Liz asking if we'll be explaining the diversity and leadership statements more, and also what does character and fitness include. Talk a little bit more about character and fitness, but the diversity and leadership statements will be in next week's webinar. We'll be talking in more detail about that as far as that element of the application. Single or double space for the statement. We prefer double space. As you can tell, I'm wearing reading glasses, and one of the reasons I'm using reading glasses is the small font and tight line spacing has sometimes made it difficult. So we would ask that you double space for the personal, for all your statements, quite frankly. And Ms. Moreno has posted in the chat the link for some of that information. And again, if you could please put the questions in the Q&A, it lets everybody see them, as well as if I happen to lose the Q&A, Ms. Moreno can refer that to me. Okay, so I've talked about the elements of the application that you'll be submitting to our program. In terms of all those components are used in answering 3 very broad questions that drive our admissions decision making. 2 of those questions are academic in nature, and then the third is kind of a what more question. As you can see from the slide, the first question is, has the candidate demonstrated that he or she has an academic skill set and intellect necessary to competently perform in law school? The next question is a relative measure of that question. How well has this demonstration of the academic skill set and intellect, how strong has it been relative to the pool that the candidate is competing with? That is probably one of the most central questions in this process. What we have seen over the years is that with candidates attending events like this and becoming very well informed, they know kind of the opportunities they may have in being admitted to a law school. So based on our admissions index, which is a 3-digit number that is created by calculating or using a formula that employs the LSAT and the cumulative GPA. And that formula is given to us by the Law School Admission Council based on correlation studies done every year on our first year class. And those correlation studies seek to adjust the index so that it has the best predictive value. And based on that index, the vast majority of the candidates applying to our school are demonstrating that on a very basic level, they have that skill set. So the real distinguishing question is, how well has that skill set been demonstrated relative to the pool of candidates you will be competing with. This year's pool consisted of just over 1,100 applicants. That was a 36% increase over last year's applicant pool. So we saw a pretty significant shifting of both the pool and some of the numbers that we're looking at in terms of the admission rate. It did drop to below 30%. And the LSAT and the GPA did increase as medians of our entering class. This year's median LSAT was 163 for the entering class, and the median cumulative GPA, undergraduate GPA, was 3.82. The third question we're asking is, what more are you bringing to the law school by virtue of your life experiences, backgrounds, and interests that's going to enhance the student population that you're going to be a part of for the 3 years that you're with us in law school? But additionally, what potential do you have to positively impact the community at large as an officer of the court and an alum of our program? So those are the three very broad questions that are driving the process. And the components of the application include looking at that skill set, and we'll cover that a little bit more closely next week, because that's a part of my discussion about some of the things you may want to consider as you're putting together your personal statement or selecting letter of recommendation writers, to the extent that how you strategize and use that personal statement, as well as effectively selecting who will be writing those letters of recommendation and what the content of those letters of recommendation should include. I'm going to go to the questions now. First question is, what is the range of scores that we're looking for on the LSAT? And what is the limits that you consider? So there is no limit. That is, we do not automatically deny or admit anybody based on LSAT alone or GPA alone. We read the entire application before decisions are made. We do have a presumptive categorization of the candidates, in which, based on index, the scores are high enough that we would presume to admit the candidate unless there's something in the file that would raise serious questions. Those indexes tend to be in about the top 10% of the pool as a whole. Indexes that are at about the 186 or plus range. But here again, that may be adjusted as we look at the size of the pool, and if it increases or decreases, and we notice those increases or decreases early in the process. On the lower end, here again, we look at the entirety of the application, and we focus the question on, has the candidate demonstrated that he or she has the academic skill set necessary to compete in and complete our program? So we know that not all candidates are appropriately measured by the instrument, which is the LSAT, that there may be other information or context in reading that academic record. So I've given you what the median LSAT for the entering class was and the median GPA. The 25th and 75th percentile range for the entering class were 159 to 165 on the LSAT. The absolute range was 149 to 177. So we do have LSATs that go below 150 in terms of those who have been admitted and enrolled. For the GPA, as I mentioned, it was 382 for the median. The 25th and 75th percentile splits were 365 to 395, and the absolute range was 2.56 to 4.1. One thing I do want to acknowledge in the evaluation of the candidates is the person with the 2.56 is not the same person as the 149, but I think that does give evidence that we do take into consideration a multitude of things as we're evaluating the candidate and making decisions on that demonstration of the academic skill set. Donovan's asking a question about keeping LSAT scores. Would it be better to keep a low LSAT score or removing them when retaking the LSAT exam? So you can't remove an LSAT score. Once you have had that score posted to your law school CAS report or your CAS record, it's there, and it's there for 5 years. One of the options that is available for people who are taking the LSAT for the very first time is score cancellation. That for a fee, and I believe if you pay it before you sit for the LSAT, it's $45. And if you pay it after you've sat for the LSAT, but before you've made your decision on canceling it, it's $75. It lets you look at the score before it's released to schools. And for your first test, you can elect to kind of not release it and schools won't see it. After that, we will be seeing all scores, or if you choose not to cancel it, we will see all the scores from all the tests you've taken over a 5-year period. On the subject of the LSAT, that 5-year testing period, do know you are limited in the number of times you can sit for the LSAT. So in a testing cycle, and for this year, the testing cycle runs from August to June, you can only take 3 of the 8 LSATs that are offered in this testing cycle. And then over a 5-year period, you can only take the LSAT a total of 5 times. And then over your lifetime, you cannot take the LSAT more than 7 times. So there's a little more information about the LSAT. I would, if you have not already investigated the LSAT, I would encourage you to spend a good amount of time before you register for it, knowing what's involved with sitting for the LSAT and what the requirements are in terms of not discussing it or disclosing questions to others. You will be taking the LSAT in a setting of your choosing, whether it's in your home or if you choose to rent a hotel room or go to a private testing area. But nevertheless, there is a online proctor, and the login process is a bit involved. So be aware of that. Next question, is it worth submitting a professional letter of recommendation in addition to the preferred academic letters of recommendation if you've been in the workforce for a couple of years? It's a good question. Quickly try to answer that. The letters of recommendation are a part of next week's discussion, but in terms of the letters of recommendation from a professional source, it depends, I think, on kind of what they would say about you and how it relates to the rest of the information that you have in your file. I think it is a common approach that if someone's been out of school for more than 3-4 years, that they have those who surround them professionally, whether it's supervisors, colleagues, clients, people they've worked for, writing letters of recommendation. And think as you select that person, how they would contribute to the information you're submitting in looking at this strategy approach. Next question is, Donovan is saying he had signed up to be able to cancel it for the 021. I'm not sure if that's if that's the first test of the 21 testing cycle. And so August 21. So yeah, that's once those scores are released, which should be any day now, actually, it may have been last week, but you should have gotten that report and you can elect whether or not you can choose to cancel it. And if you choose to cancel it and you've paid for that, then yes, schools won't see that score. Next question. The question is, will we review an application if it has both a valid LSAT score and a pending LSAT score, or will we wait until the pending score is posted? We will put the file in the queue for review as long as there is one LSAT available. So going back to the application file components, in terms of all our required elements, if we have the personal statement, one letter of recommendation, the resume, a completed credential assembly service report with one LSAT score reported, as well as the writing sample, and the application fee, then your file will be marked as complete and placed in the queue for review. And if we get to the review of your file before the second LSAT or the next LSAT is posted, we'll make a decision based on the contents of that application. If you would like us to wait for that pending LSAT score to be posted, then you'll need to send an email to either Ms. Nyborg or the general admissions email address and request that we hold your file until we get the LSAT that you have registered for. It's very important that you include which LSAT you want us to hold it for. As I mentioned, people will take the LSAT as many as 3 times. And if you want us to wait to the very next one, then say you're taking the February or the November test and you'd like us to hold the review of your file until that time. And then once that score is posted, we will review it. And if you want to extend that hold until you register for or take the next test, then you kind of do that again. And we need these requests in writing so we can document that you've made the request that we not review your file until you're waiting for this next element in it. Lauren's asking a great question. What makes a resume and a personal statement stand out? I will discuss that specifically on next week's webinar when we talk about the personal statements and the resumes. Is it beneficial to submit an application before the LSAT score has been released or posted? I think, in my opinion, that it's best to wait for all the elements of your application are ready before you submit. This is a process that's not a race to the front door, but rather what I call a process about quality. And also, it's a process in which you need to be able to give yourself a self-assessment. And it's really important as part of that assessment and knowing what we're going to have in front of us for you to spread everything out in front of you and reviewing it before we get it. And so obviously, if you're waiting for an LSAT score to be posted, you won't have the entirety of your application to look over before you submit it to us. What sometimes people would want to do if they do really well on the LSAT, or if they don't do as well as expected, be in a position to be able to submit either an addendum or include a paragraph in the personal statement or ask a letter writer to make mention of that in their support of your candidacy. And so if you submit the application before you receive the LSAT score, then that's not a real possibility unless you want to submit something after it's been done. And so that can delay the process. And then if your file's already been completed, it may already be in the queue. So it's my personal opinion that you wait to submit the application until you've got all the elements that will complete it in place, and you can review them to make sure of their accuracy and if you want to make comments on them. How much worse are your chances in getting in if you apply in November versus September or October? This goes to the idea that I don't view this as a race to the front door, that it depends on when you're going to have a higher quality application. Is it because you're going to take the later LSAT and you have more time to prepare for it and therefore perform better? If it's the same quality application that you would have in November, December versus September, October, high quality, shoot for September and October, but quality should drive the submission date or the target date in which you want to submit applications. Next question is, would you recommend, or would I recommend putting a part-time undergraduate job while working in college before you receive an internship, for example, at a grocery store or restaurant? Yeah, I think that's part of that completeness of the file. We do ask for kind of that employment record. I know that not all jobs are long-term. It also depends on how long ago it was. So I'm assuming the way you're asking the question that you're a recent college graduate or you're still in school. And so we would want to see that employment record. I think, don't discount a job title or a job location. I think we have an appreciation for people who have a strong work ethic. And we know that not all jobs are glamorous. And for people applying to law school, not all jobs are going to be related to the law. Personally, among the jobs that I did and I included in my application to law school was working concrete. I poured concrete for a couple of summers while I was an undergrad, and had other kind of manual labor type jobs, and they weren't glamorous and they weren't full-time in the sense that once the summer was over, I was back at school. But nevertheless, I included them in part because proud of the work that I do, but also I think it did indicate the kind of work ethic I had in terms of willing to put in effort and hard work and do a job that was available if I had it. And don't be concerned about kind of like that job title or the location about that. I hope that answers your question. If you'd like a little more detail, don't hesitate to reach out or post the question a little differently. Does applying an early decision give any extra weight to your application? We do have a early decision process. We talked about it in last week's webinar, and we'll be posting that to our YouTube page so that people have access to that information. Applying early decision, I wouldn't say gives extra weight, and to a certain degree, our early decision process is actually a little bit more competitive than the regular decision process. What we have found over the last couple of years of data that we have is, for example, I mentioned last year the admission rate was just under 30%. It was 28% at the end of the process. The admission rate for people in the early decision process was 13%. We will not admit more than 10% of an entering class out of our early decision pool. Our entering class this year was 95 students. We ultimately admitted 6 out of our early decision pool. The previous year, we admitted 8. We've already made our target decision on our class size for this year, and it will again be between 90 and 100 candidates. So we expect kind of a similar admission number for the early decision candidates. What will drive the admission rate for that candidate pool will be the number of applications we ultimately receive. As I mentioned, last year it was 45. The previous year, I think it was 47 applications that we got out of that pool. Let me go ahead and move forward to the next section of our discussion, so we don't run out of time. It's already 6 o'clock, and I have a couple of other sections that I want to talk about, and then I'll get to the Q&A. This is the timeline section. I just want to advise people a little bit. And actually, this goes to some of the questions you're asking about when is it better to apply and what have you. The timeline that I'm recommending is one that takes a look at someone maybe in their junior year applying and looking at the 12 to 18 month period before you see yourself enrolling in law school. And so if one is looking at wanting to enroll in the entering class that starts fall of 22, which is what this application cycle is about, back in winter and spring of 2021 is when I would encourage people to have begun registering for, preparing, and identifying the period in which they want to sit for the LSAT, and knowing that that period should include 6 to 8 weeks before the test date to have ample time to prepare. And then also registering for the LSAT, giving yourself a cushion that if you don't do as well the first time as you expect, or you just know that you want to give it 2 tries, that you give that 2 test cushion, that you give yourself enough time to take the second test after you receive your scores from the first test. And here again, with that second test, giving yourself and identifying that 6 to 8 weeks before to make adjustments to plan to prepare, but also making adjustments to your preparation if you feel you need to. During this time period, you should also be researching law schools and investigating the process. Going online, looking at schools' websites, spending some time at the various discussion boards, whether it be Reddit, top law schools, places like that. But one caution looking to the boards is, or the discussion boards, is kind of know the source that you are conversing with. I see a lot of information out there. Some of it's really good and I think thoughtful, but some of it isn't, and it's ill-informed. So could be, it's kind of like the cliche, the Latin or the phrase buyer beware, caveat emptor. The caution I give is often tied to what I most often see is people who are new to the process advising themselves. I think you should go directly to the schools and the folks who do this for a living, and in many cases have been doing it for years and years, to get the information you're looking for. Often the advice I see on the discussion boards are people who are in the process themselves, or maybe in their second the first or second year of law school, and they don't have the full breadth of experience or knowledge and multiple admission cycles to look to kind of see how changes shift. So be aware of that in terms of the sources. During this winter, springtime period, also do that self-assessment. Kind of start looking at pull your transcript, look at that. Think about what you would do in terms of what you would include in a resume, and just look at your strengths and your weakness, and just kind of, here again, doing that self-assessment in preparation for how you're going to put together that packet of information. This research and investigation is going to let you know what's going to be required, that contents of the application that I just covered in the earlier portion of our slides, and give an honest view of yourself as you assess. In summer, that just passed, in early fall, you'll want to subscribe to the Credential Assembly Service Report, as I mentioned. Order your transcripts. Make sure you give enough time for them to get to the service report, and so that you'll have time to kind of look through the report, make sure the calculation of the GPA is correct. It's very, very rare that there are errors in that, but in the time that I've been doing this, which is a while, 30 years, I have on rare occasions seen the Law School Admission Council had miscalculated a cumulative GPA. So this will give you plenty of time to make sure you're going through all that information. Pull together the documents that are going to be required to be submitted and start reviewing it, in addition to the transcripts, letters of recommendation. Sometimes schools will require what's referred to as a dean's letter, which is a letter from the dean of students at your institutions confirming or identifying any character and fitness issues as it relates to student behavior or academic discipline. So know if those are out there. And it's also a time to start requesting letters of recommendation, identify the letter of recommendation writers, and start making requests of them to write those letters and setting up meetings. We'll talk about how you should go about doing that next week. Start drafting your resume in the fall. This is about the time you're going to start wanting to draft your resume. If you're still in school, go to the Career Services Office and ask for their assistance in putting together a resume. I'm okay with a two-page resume for somebody who's been working for a while. If you're a recent college graduate, I think it's fairly rare that you would have a two-page resume. So keep that in mind. And in terms of the style of the resume, I think that Career Service Office or the web would be a great resource in identifying how that resume should look. If you've already got a resume because you've been in the workforce for a while, don't worry about reconfiguring it to look like what you think a lawyer's resume would look like. Feel free to use the resume style that is common to your profession. We understand there's different styles out there. Fall is when you're going to be drafting your personal statements. And the thing about drafting is it's draft. You should at least have 5 or 6 drafts of that personal statement before you feel you're getting close to having that final one. It's going to take time, especially for schools that limit, the pages and the word count. Writing short documents is one of the hardest things to do. So know that. And then start reviewing application forms and knowing where questions are a little bit different in the forms and how you might want to answer those questions, especially, as I alluded to earlier, the character and fitness questions. Then in the fall, continuing, then you compile the applications, you start submitting them. You track the application material submission as it's sent into either the CAS subscription service or attached to your applications that you will be submitting through the Law School Admission Council portal. If you're going to be submitting any supplemental information, you want to closely track that because you'll be submitting that information directly to the schools. Once you have submitted your application through that web portal, you're not going to be able to make additions through that portal. You're going to have to make any additions to the schools directly. And then track your letters of recommendation. Quick suggestion on letters of recommendation. Use your thank you letters as a way to kind of help manage that process. So give your letter writers plenty of time to get the letters into the Law School Admission Council service, but definitely give them a deadline. And then check your files. If the letters have been received, you can send a thank you note to the people who wrote the letters and let them know that they've been received and that you appreciate their help in the process. If the letters have not yet been received, you can send a thank you letter with a little prompt indicating that you were checking your record and noticed that the letter had not yet been received. So you just have to gently remind them that there is a deadline that you're trying to meet in applying, and encouraging that they get the letter in as quickly as possible. So that's one way to help in the tracking process with letters of recommendation and using thank you notes as part of that. Then do the little bit of a scary thing, submit those applications. You submit those applications and then it's the wait period. But that'll start happening in late fall and early winter. You're going to start getting letters of admission. With those letters of admission, know that schools have different processes in the awarding of scholarships. Sometimes scholarships will come with the admission packet. Other schools, such as ours, make scholarship decisions apart from the admission decision, and they may come a little bit later. Feel free to ask questions about that. Usually those questions will be answered in that admission packet, but if you're a little nervous, don't hesitate to ask as part of the research that you're doing in terms of how schools go about awarding merit scholarships and how they notify candidates and when they notify candidates of those awards. For the schools you've been admitted to, visit them. It's a big part and an important part of the financing of your legal education. Legal education is really expensive. The average law school debt for people who have attended public schools hovers around $90,000. For people who are graduates of private schools, the average debt hovers around $130,000. So with that six-figure debt, it's a bit like a mortgage. And I often tell people, if it's a bit like a mortgage, think about using kind of that house hunting strategy. You wouldn't put a mortgage down on a house or put a down payment on a house and take on a mortgage without doing a walkthrough and visiting the neighborhood and looking closely at the house. That's what school visits are about, making sure you know kind of where your investment is going in that tuition and the institution that you're going to be living in for 3 years, and are you comfortable with that? And then know that seat deposits will need to be submitted beginning in April. And those will be, that's when kind of the confirmation of your intent to enroll begins. And then you'll start the matriculation process in late spring, getting ready to enroll in the law school you've committed to. So that's the timeline. And we're going to jump to the Credential Assembly report in these last 15 or so minutes, but let me get to some of the letters or the questions that I see in the Q&A. Does early decision give any extra weight to your application? I forgot to remove that from the list. If a person is wanting to get a joint degree, would I recommend doing both the master's application at the same time? And is there a good amount of overlap in the elements? Great question. And the answer actually probably differs pretty broadly from school to school. Here at the University of Utah, our joint degree programs have a process in which we make independent decisions on admissions. And so you will be submitting a separate application to the other department that you're applying to on the master's side of it. You can either apply concurrently in the same application cycle or consecutively a year later for either of it. So assuming you're applying to law school this year, if you choose to apply to the master's program also this year, then once you're admitted into both programs, you can at that point declare an interest in doing the joint degree, and then you'll have to make a decision which program you will start your education with first. Do know that here at the law school, we require you to attend the law school exclusively for your first year of law school. And then it's after that you can start mixing up classes. Because other departments, the master's programs don't require that full year of attendance exclusively, first full year. The vast majority of the students who apply concurrently and are doing the joint degree will start with the law school, but not all. I will acknowledge that not all have done that. In applying consecutively, let's say you apply and get into the law school and you start here, then you'll have that 1 year, that period of your first year of law school to apply to the other program in the master's degree. And if admitted, then at the end of your first year, you can start mixing up classes, or if there's a semester where you need to attend that program exclusively, you can do so then. So that's kind of the timeline of this. In terms of the elements of the applications, I'd say they're very similar. They're all going to require personal statements. I think you're going to want to tailor the personal statement for whichever master's program you're applying to. So don't plan on using the same personal statement. You may also want to think about is, would you still be using the same type of professional letter in the letters of recommendation for the master's program? So you want to strategize about that. And then finally, in terms of admissions or entrance exams, the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences for the Masters of Public Policy, MPP, or MPA, Masters of Public Administration, will allow you to use the LSAT for their admissions purposes. But for the other departments, you'll have to check and see their requirements. On occasion, we've had the business school allow students to use their LSAT. They've changed that rule somewhat frequently, quite frankly, and so you'll want to check their website. In the years or the times they've allowed students to use the LSAT for their admissions purposes, it's usually been for students who have an undergraduate degree already in business. So that's the one caveat. But always check the other departments' websites, and those are posted on our website where we have information on joint degrees on how to get information from those programs. I don't know if Ms. Moreno can do a quick look on the web to give them that link. Next question. If we accept a letter of recommendation from a boss or manager in addition to an educator one, yes, we would. I always tell folks that as you look to the letters of recommendations from supervisors, think about, have they had the opportunity to observe you perform the academic skill set that we're interested in, the communication, if there's analysis or evaluation in the job work you do. And so if you've been out of school for a while, you might want to look at the different people you've worked in. And in next week's application workshop, I will discuss kind of what we include in the elements of the academic skill set and the criteria under which you're evaluated in terms of how we look for that skill set. You might want to combine letter writers in a way that they fill in different areas of the skill set. One might be about organization and work ethic, and the other letter writer might be one who's going to emphasize your communication skills and what they've observed you do. So something to think about there. Question is, do I sit on the admissions committee? Yes, the admissions committee consists of myself, our director for admissions, Ms. Moreno, and then in cases, so we have a process in which it's what I call a 2 out of 3 majority vote. If there's 2 votes to admit, the candidate is in. If there's 2 votes to deny, the candidate is denied. If there's an admit vote and a deny vote, and we can't come to a resolution on it, then a faculty member of the admissions committee is brought in to evaluate the file. So it is a team of 3 with first readers consisting of myself and our director for admissions. If we have, Mr. Keller's asking if we have 2 undergraduate classes as class of 2019 and 2020, will we take all that coursework into consideration? And this is actually a rule of the Law School Admission Council. And so in computing your cumulative GPA, what is reported is the GPA earned for the first bachelor's degree. So if you earned a dual degree, if you double majored, then the cumulative GPA will reflect that all the GPA for that double major that you graduated at the same time. If you've received 2 bachelor's degree, but one was awarded in 2019 and one was awarded in 2020, the courses you took between 2019 and the conference of the second degree in 2020 are not computed into the GPA. What's the report fee, and is LSAC specific fee that you can't avoid? So we'll talk a little bit about this in the financial aid workshops. There is a portion of financing your legal education that does take into account how expensive the application process is. The registration fee, or I should say the subscription fee for the candidate assembly or the credential assembly service is $195. And then for every school that you're applying to, you pay a $45 school report fee for the distribution of those reports. And then each school that you apply to may charge an application fee. As I mentioned, everyone who's watching the webinar tonight will get a fee waiver code for our application fee, which is typically $60. The candidate's asking, if rejected this cycle, can the person reapply in the 22-23 cycle? Yes, and every year we have people who are reapplicants in the process. If one were to be denied admissions, I always strongly encourage them to meet with myself or Ms. Moreno for what we call a post-cycle review session. And what we will do is go over your previous application with you and give you our opinions on the strengths and weaknesses and the things you may want to consider changing in anticipation of the next cycle. That is a post-decision process. We will not review a candidate's pending application file and give advice on that part of that. A big part of that is just kind of fairness. We don't have time to provide that service to all candidates. And because of that, we don't provide it to any. That's kind of the fairness side of it. The other side of it is, this is a process of, part of this is your ability to communicate and impress upon us the answers to those three very broad questions I said that drive this process. Let me go ahead and move on. We've got less than 10 minutes for this last section, so I want to make sure we get through the elements of the credential assembly because I referred to it so many times. So I think the easiest way that I can describe the academic elements and how we look at the credential assembly service report is actually to give you the view of what's called the law school report. I hope you can see my cursor moving around. The law school report is what this cover page is that is attached to your writing sample that you produce as part of the LSAT process when you sit for the LSAT. All the transcripts you submit, both undergraduate and if you have any graduate school work, and then your letters of recommendation. Those are all part of the CAS law school, the CAS report. And then this law school report is this one-page cover sheet that kind of gives us a quick view of what the contents of the application are and some of the reported elements. There's a lot of information here, and I like to use this to impress upon people that research and evaluation and self-assessment that I discussed in the timeline. You'll see that even on this one-page report, there's a lot of information that I think sometimes where people are surprised at how much we get about you. The background section will give us kind of the information about everything from the undergraduate major. That gives us a quick assessment. We know that there's a difference between somebody who earned a degree in mechanical engineering and the rigor or the challenging nature of the curriculum, perhaps, and somebody who got a degree in social recreation. So this is our first glance at the degree, undergraduate degree that the person earned. For state schools such as ours, we do seek to enroll a majority of Utah residents in the class, and so state residency matters to a certain degree. I'll get into more detail when we get into the workshop next week about how that may play out. But just know that we'll see that at the time this person registered for the credential assembly service, they declared that they are a permanent resident of New York. I'll compare this answer to what they put on their application form. We essentially ask the same question, and if they conflict, I might have a question about that. Why when they filled this out, a few weeks ago, they said they were a citizen of New York, state's resident, and then on our application, they said they were a resident of Utah. There might be a very good explanation for that. Maybe they're in the military and they're stationed at the Air Force Base just north of us, which is fine and is fairly common. But that might be a piece of information in this section that might catch my attention. This section includes all the colleges and universities that the person has attended as reported in the materials they submit or as discovered in the transcript evaluation conducted by the Law School Admission Council. We know that the Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering was earned at Hobart College, and that this person has a graduate degree he earned in 1997 at the Jersey Institute of Technology, a Master's of Science, and then there's some foreign education that he engaged in. There's notes for the transcripts. Just know that the people that you're sending the transcripts to at the Law School Admission Council know that have been doing this work for, in many cases, decades. So their evaluation of the transcripts is very thorough, and they will inform us of notes that are on the transcript. So this 2294 refers to this code number for the school. And so at Hobart, there were academic honors noted on the transcript, and most especially it said his class rank was really good, 47 out of 492 graduates, better than the top 10%, so that's good. This is one that would stop the application process, an unacknowledged transcript. That means it was discovered in some of the materials that were submitted that there was a school, Mr. Selden, and I want to acknowledge that Mr. Selden is a fictitious character, that Mr. Selden did not disclose a school that he had attended, but it was discovered in the review of materials that there was another school attended. So that's called an unacknowledged transcript. And because we require that you submit, as does the LSAC, submit your transcripts from all institutions you've attended since graduating from high school, that you have an incomplete file at this stage. And we would stop the review of your file until this unacknowledged transcript was turned into the CAS service. Academic action tells us to look at this file because there may have been an academic action, probation, warning, something there. Term action here would suggest that there was action taken by the university. It's not real clear. It may be a behavioral issue, but it occurred for a term, a semester. But we'd have to look at this to see those notes. And then this action, 2263, at this school, Fairleigh Dickinson, while they acknowledged Mr. Selden has a transcript with them, they would not release it to the Law School Admission Council because he has a financial obligation with them. So pay those parking tickets, people. So, a lot of information just in this row of information that we got here. This degree school refers to information pulled from Hobart College, and it lets us know of the people who were applying to law school in the last 3 years, how they performed on the LSAT as percentiles. So people who performed in the 95th percentile or better, who were graduates of Hobart Law School in the last and applied to law school in the last 3 years. 2 of them had 95th percentile LSATs. 3 of them had 94th percentile LSATs. And a school just kind of average in performance will have a normal kind of bell-shaped curve in the distribution of the numbers of people in these percentile ranks. And then it'll also let us know about the distribution of GPAs so that we can sense whether there's been a lot of grade inflation or very little grade inflation at the school as it relates to the people who are applying to law school. I do want to emphasize that the information is not about the entire institution. It only goes for the last 3 years and only for people who use the CAS service. They're pulling data from within their system to give us these numbers. In this section of the report, it lets us know a year-by-year analysis of the schools that they attended, which school is unacknowledged. The school that is a graduate school, that's where the master's is from. It doesn't give us a computation on the GPA because they encourage us, well, they tell us that we need to look at the transcript to do the evaluation. There's probably more variation in grading of graduate degree students than there is an undergraduate. Most schools are on a 4.0 scale, with 2.0 being the minimum required performance. Graduate schools vary a little bit more. Most typically, though, 4.0 scale, but 3.0 is the minimum GPA necessary for good academic standing in most of these institutions. We can see how many semester credit hours the person was registered for during this evaluation period. And then the cumulative college GPA, if there's a percentile rank of the people who have data in the system, how this GPA ranks. So that's the information there. And then in this section, we see all the information on the various grades that the candidates earned. The bottom half of the law school report shows us where the LSAT scores are, the percentile ranks of those scores, and when the test. And we can see if a person was absent from a test or if they canceled the test. And this cancellation refers to not looking at the score before they canceled it. We can see if they were previously enrolled in any other law schools. Then we can see how many credit hours were used or earned at the institution they graduated from as an undergraduate degree. And then we see the cumulative GPA they earned from all the schools they've attended and all the credits that were used in computing that cumulative undergraduate GPA. And then we know when the report was generated for us and what the application period is. So that's a quick rundown on the CAS report and having a sense of what's included in it and what we use in beginning to answer that question about that academic skill set. So hopefully you found that helpful. Here's some helpful websites that you could hopefully use as you go through this application process. I'd like to quickly go through the last 3 questions posted. Person's asking if they went to 2 schools, is it important to get a letter of recommendation from both schools? I think, it depends on how strong the letters are. My preference would be hearing from somebody who had you for class more recently. But if you have strong letters and perhaps the strategy of your application reflects classes, the kinds of classes you may have taken at that earlier institution, then it may make sense from a strategy standpoint to have a letter from that person. Will being a STEM major negatively impact how the community views your application? No, and as I indicated in regard to the example I gave about the engineering major, we know that there's less grade inflation in the hard sciences and engineering than perhaps the social sciences and the humanities. So I don't see that as a negative at all. And in fact, being a STEM major makes you attractive from the standpoint of if you're interested in doing patent law, there's a dearth of attorneys who qualify for the patent bar. And so that may be a positive in that regard. How many credits are we, how many credits hours you're taking matter? It does, especially when one of the applications we ask on our application form is, were you working and how many hours a week were you working? And if we see you were taking 12 credit hours, but you had a 40-hour-a-week job as an undergraduate, we know that that's a really full workload, and that gives us some context to how we're reading this information. And then finally, will having an easier major hurt you? No, because we don't know necessarily whether it's actually an easy major. And I'm glad you asked this question because I like to use this example. With the information that I just showed you on that form, made the assumption that the engineering degree was a more challenging degree with less grade inflation. But let's say in addition, and we're comparing a candidate, social recreation to engineering, but let's throw in another element. Let's throw in the institution attended. Let's say the person who earned the engineering degree attended University of Phoenix. This isn't to put down University of Phoenix, but the rigor of its engineering program is not something that it's known for. But let's say the person who got the degree in social recreation was a graduate of Montana State. They have one of the most renowned recreation management programs in the country. That's where a lot of national park rangers end up going to school. And so just because the major may sound like something that's easy doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. It depends on kind of the institution and the courses they're taking. And that's how we closely evaluate the candidates in terms of the transcript and the kinds of classes that were taken. So realize that. It gives us perspective, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that it hurts you. This will be the last question I answer for tonight, just because I want to make sure that we respect the time of others. Don't hesitate to schedule time with us using the Calendly links that were provided on the first. If somebody spent a few years doing a hard major before switching to an easier one that pulled their GPA down, is that something to add to the academic addendum? You might. I mean, think about the question, anticipation, the question that may be asked if you had the opportunity for an interview, if somebody was interviewing for you for a job and they saw this. I think the interview is something that would suggest that it's not hurting you automatically, but they have a question about it. So you want to give your perspective. And is the academic addendum the right venue to do that? It may, but it also may be the personal statement, depending on what the content or the theme of your personal statement is. So think about that a little bit. Good question. And Chad finally asked, should we explain a significant increase from one LSAT score to the next? Yeah, it depends on what the significant increase, a 10-point score. Yeah. I'd like to know kind of what went wrong the first time, or what did you change up the next time? And those changes, how does that relate to kind of what your attitude coming into law school is? Did you learn something from it? Did you is this demonstration of work ethic or stick-to-itiveness, those kinds of things? So that may warrant a discussion there if that information isn't already there. So for example, if you were in the military, the first time you took the test was during a deployment, it could be just a sentence on a resume or a personal statement. You may not need an addendum for that. But if, that it wasn't an extreme example like that, then maybe I would suggest talking about that. I very much appreciate the time you've given us to this evening. I want to thank Ms. Moreno for managing the chat. There was a lot going on there. And I'd encourage you to attend next week's program, and we can get to some of the questions about the contents and approaches to letters of recommendation, selecting letters of recommendation, your personal statement, and any other factors you want to work into the application process. Thank you, Ms. Moreno. Thank you, Mr. Cope, and have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye-bye.